We want to thank you for choosing RV Trip Wizard. In this video, I'll show you how to create a simple trip and get you started on taking your RV out on the road. You'll find this video along with others on our RV Trip Wizard YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. We also host live support and Q&A sessions through Facebook Live. Okay, so we're logged in. You can see we don't have any trips created yet. We're going to go ahead and start by clicking on a new trip. Now before we do that, you may see this video screen come up. This is simply to inform you that there's some new videos or new information you should see. Once you're done looking at that, if you don't wish that pop-up to be in your way any longer, you can scroll to the bottom and there's a place to turn that off. Once we're logged in, the other possibility, especially if it's the first time you've ever logged in, is that your default settings may not have been set. So you'll find that if you click on your name in the upper right hand corner, you'll see mine is set as RV Trip Wizard Video. This will be your name. You click in the upper right hand corner and you can choose the default settings. Again, this should come up automatically and you should have already filled this in, but if it's your first time using it, you'll need to take care of this. You can see here under the general settings, I simply have mine set to click for stop details. The other option here is to hover. The hovering works great with a mouse, but if you're using a touchpad of some sort, it could be not able to detect that properly, so you can set that for click to stop. You have the option to auto load the last trip. This is great if you're working on a single trip and it's the only project you kind of have in the hopper. You turn that off if you have several things going on. You don't always want to have to close one trip and then get into another. Next, we'll look at the RV info. You'll want to plug in the height in feet and inches, length in feet and inches, and the weight of your rig. We want to be able to route you safely, and we need these RV dimensions to make that happen. You'll have your fuel type, your fuel capacity, your fuel reserve, and your economy. A quick note about the fuel reserve: those of you with onboard generators or diesel heating systems, those things always require you have at least a quarter of a tank. So you'll want your minimum to be at least a quarter of a tank. Here, I've got mine set for 30, which gives me a little bit of a buffer. So this will come in later, but this means our mileage will be calculated on the remaining fuel, in this case 70 gallons, times my 8 miles to the gallon. And we'll talk about that more a bit later. If you're carrying propane, be sure you check yes. This will help keep you out of areas that propane is not allowed. In this case, mine is no. When it comes to the routing and driving tab, I'm going to want mine on RV routing. I want this thing to plot as if I'm driving a 43-foot RV, as we specified in the info. The only thing I really care to avoid is unpaved roads. I might try to avoid ferries, but I'm not likely to run into those here in Dallas. And my driving speed, so this is important. This isn't the speed you typically drive on the freeway because it's usually not 50, it's usually a bit higher. This is sort of your overall driving speed on roads and highways and streets, and what's it going to average out to at the end of the day. You may not know that right away. If you're driving a big rig and pulling a vehicle, that's probably going to be about 50 and 55 are the two numbers we see the most. So I've got mine set at 50 and I want my configuring to use my average driving speed. I want to use that in conjunction here with my driving radius. So I've got my driving radius set at 5 hours. I want Trip Wizard to show me where I'm going to be at the end of a 5-hour day driving 50 miles an hour. Then I'll know that's where I want to camp. And we'll look at our expenses next. Here I've got good average roundabout numbers for budgeting. At this level, on the turquoise default settings screen, this is all we care about right now. Camping, $40, meals, $20, miscellaneous, $3, maybe a toll here and there, and $3 an average cost of diesel. Memberships and favorites, I don't really need to specify those right now. If I want to show only preferred campgrounds, I'll need to have that over. Or if I only want to stay or want to quickly identify, say, specific types of campgrounds, Let's say I want to keep an eye out for Encore and FMCA campgrounds. This isn't going to limit my view, but it'll show me some of the icons a little more prevalently. So we can leave those in there. We'll add Good Sam if we want, just to give us some color. If I was to check this box to show only these types of campgrounds, that's all we would see. So as it stands, I'm happy with this as my default settings. I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to start a new trip. We'll call it Demo Trip. And it's important to choose the correct date. I'm going to pick, say, October 1st. A lot of folks plan their trips in January, and if you don't change that date, you just leave it to whatever the current day is, it will think you're leaving in January, and it won't route you around certain roads that are seasonally closed. It may not even show you campgrounds that are seasonally closed, so be sure and put the right date in there. We'll hit Create, and I can either pick a place on the map, search for a specific location to start my trip, such as where I store my RV, or I can just pick Use My Location. So RV Trip Wizard is going to determine exactly where I'm located, and now it's popping up my red trip settings screen. So the turquoise is your default settings. We don't have to mess with those again. The red trip settings are for specific cases in each trip. So I'm going to get this each time I start a new trip. I can just hit save and move on, which we'll do in a moment. I could tweak some of these settings. For example, if I was going to spend a week boondocking, I might change my camping costs. If I was going to spend a trip a week at luxury RV resorts, I might change my camping costs. If I was going on a trip without my tow vehicle, I might increase my miles per hour or my driving time. All these are changeable at a per trip level. As I said, I'm not going to change any of these. I'm just going to hit save. So now I've got a starting point. Now I need a destination. Where do we want to go? So in this case, we'll pick Grand Canyon, for example. And I can either zoom in here and just click on the Grand Canyon, or I can search for it. And if I type that in, Grand Canyon, you can see several things come up. I can actually pick the South Rim. I'm not really going to probably find a campground for my motorhome right on the South Rim, or I can choose a nearby RV park. Here's the Grand Canyon Railway RV Park, and you can see here's where those FMCA and Good Sam monikers, these things kind of come into play. Now if we look at our research tab, we can see these various campgrounds we've chosen, or we've seen in sight here, and as I highlight them, they bounce up and down to help identify them on the map. Now we specifically chose Grand Canyon Railway Park, and you can see that that icon is much larger than the others. So we're going to go ahead and choose that one. We need to see the more details so that we can add it to our trip. The other thing I wanted to show you quick is you can get a quick look at how many miles this is from our starting point, 975 miles, and you can see the ratings. It's a very highly rated campground. Now, we want to stay there 3 nights, and then I'm going to add it to my trip. You can also see here we've got plenty of photos to help me choose to see if that campground is what I want. I can look at the features to make sure it's 50 amp, pull through, pet area, etc. We even show you what type of connectivity is available in that area. I can pour through several reviews. You see they're all highly rated. I can look at various tips about what to do in the area perhaps, and I can even see the weather at the time of year we're planning. So we said October 1st, so in October these are the temperatures we can expect to find. And here's the temperature right now. So we're pretty happy with that. We're going to add that to our trip. And you can see here it is on the left. Now, that's 975 miles away. I still need to get there somehow. So now I've got a general plan, a general route. This is an RV safe route based on the criteria I plugged in for my RV dimensions. I now need to find my first campground to get there. You can see here at the end of my driving day is that green ring we talked about, and I could hunt for a campground right around here. I can tell, and I know, however, that if I'm willing to drive another hour or so, I can get into Amarillo and have a much better selection. So I can click on a few of these. This looks interesting. Never been there before. 4 stars, 356 reviews. Looks fine. We'll look at some details about it. We can see we've got some pictures. Okay, you know what? It's an overnighter. We're not looking for a vacation here. We'll just grab that one. We'll pick one night. And it's after our initial starting point. If I leave this on last stop, it's going to tack it to the end of my trip after the Grand Canyon, which won't make sense. And in fact, a good note here, some folks don't bother with their final destination. They just build it out one stop at a time. So either is fine. There's not a right or a wrong to that. Now, as I highlight my new arrival point after one night, this is where I'm going to be. And if I zoom out, my driving ring has moved. Now I can see that I'm going to need a campground near Albuquerque at the end of my driving day. So here again, I can pick something right there on the bubble. This is where I said I was willing to go. But you know what? We could fine-tune this just a tad. Let's look at our research here, and we're going to look at our filters. I don't have a lot of interest in staying in 3-star joints. I want to stay in a 4-star, and I want to make sure they've got 50 amp full hookups and pull-throughs because we're driving a big rig, and I got pets with me. So now I've really narrowed my criteria down. You can see I've got 6 filters established. So we're going to see some campgrounds drop off the map now. And that one that was right on the line here isn't there any longer. So I'm going to drive a little farther. We'll get a little deeper into Albuquerque. See what we've got here. 530 reviews, 4 stars. Now we'll take a gamble. We can look at some of the pictures real quick. We can even hit the website if we choose. Jump out to campground reviews. We can look at satellite view. All kinds of information to help us determine if this campground is suitable. In this case it is. We're going to stay 2 nights. Don't like to do back-to-back one-nighters. And we're going to add this to our trip after the Big Texan Ranch. Now, we mentioned the budgeting earlier. You can see my camping total is $80. Well, I didn't call them and ask them what their fee is. That's just my roundabout number of 2 nights at $40, which was what my default was. I can go in and change that later at the stop level if I care. Right now, I'm just budgeting. It's not that important to me. We're going to add that in there. And I've got my second stop. And you can see my third stop will be right out there at Grand Canyon if I'm willing to drive a 7-hour day. Or, if we back it down again a little bit, suppose I'm not willing to drive past my criteria that I set forth. I may want to stay here. That'd be fun to see Meteor Crater, wouldn't it? Looks like a nice campground. It's a decent picture. It's got high ratings. I could read some of the reviews here if I wanted to. We can look at the features, tips and tricks. We can also check the weather. For a one-nighter, that'll be fine. We're going to stay there after the American RV Resort. So now I've got the bones of a good trip already going here. We'll hide these campgrounds. And there we go. There's a trip to the Grand Canyon. Now we got to add some incidentals. We're going to need fuel. You can see I've got a fuel warning right there. So we're going to pop on some fuel stops. We'll zoom in. We're going to look at Flying J, Pilot. I've got rest areas selected. I really don't need aquariums, zoos, or pet stores selected, but they're available as well. So with this fuel warning, I need fuel right around this location. I can grab fuel early here in Santa Rosa. I could grab fuel a little later here in Moriarty. It kind of depends on what your reserve is and how well you know your rig. So I'm going to go ahead and just get fuel here in Santa Rosa. We'll click on that Pilot Center. This is after our big text stop. We're not going to put any nights. There's no fuel. Excuse me, we're not sleeping there. We're just getting fuel. We'll add that to our trip. We don't need to worry about putting any cost at that point. You can see it's now in line with our trip, but we still have our fuel warning. That's because although we made the stop, we haven't added the fuel yet. So let's click over on the Edit button. We can see we've used about 63 gallons of fuel, so we're going to add 63 when we get to this fuel stop. It'll round it down for us nicely. We don't have to do any math. And we're going to save it. So what it did was it showed me a fuel warning at about the 560 mile level, because that was my 70 gallons times my 8 miles to the gallon, and said, look, you're going to need fuel there. So I know that if I pull into this Pilot, I'm going to fill up. It's going to be about 63 gallons, and I'll move on. And I won't need fuel till 560 miles later. You can see we don't have another fuel warning. I'll be able to make it all the way to the Grand Canyon without needing fuel. But this fuel stop, I mean, this is calculated, it can be depended on, and I can bank on it. I can plan my fuel stops 100% here in TripWizard. So all that really remains to make this trip out to the Grand Canyon a little easier is to perhaps throw in some rest stops. So we've got those selected already. We'll turn off the fuel. I don't need to see those any longer. I'm not zoomed in close enough. And I really only want to see rest areas. And you can see as we get close enough, it'll show them to us. You can also see I've actually got Walmarts turned on. I can stop at a Walmart if I want. Some folks will camp there. I may just choose to stock up on groceries or whatever. But in this leg from Dallas to Amarillo, for example, I'm just going to make a rest stop here. We want to go northbound. That's where we're going. So we'll add that northbound stop. And it's just a quick rest stop. And we can look at our trip. Oops, I'm going to turn these off. We can look at our trip kind of in its entirety, and there it is. I've got fuel stops, I've got rest areas, I've got campgrounds, and I've got a trip planned where I know where I'm going to start. Obviously, I'm going to go through each of these legs and probably add a rest area about every 2 hours. I'm going to need fuel coming back if I decide to set a round trip or if I decide to take a different way home. But that's the simplicity of it. And of course, that was a large scale trip. We can do the very same thing on a very short, simple trip. You know, if we were only going to Amarillo, we could come through here and we'll kill off all these other stops. And we'll just work with this segment here. And I could add that second rest area in. And then I could even come over here and set a return trip. Click on my round trip options button, mirror my stops back, and there you go. Now you can see, we talked about the fuel earlier. In this new short trip that I've chosen, I can get up to Amarillo and back to just about Wichita Falls before I'll need fuel. And really that same rule applies. There's a Flying J right there in Wichita. We can add that to our trip. We know that's the last stop before we get home. And all we got to do is go in here and add some fuel. I'm going to need about 70 gallons, it looks like. And there we go. And I'm home. I'm able to plan the fuel stops, the rest areas, the campgrounds. I can even add this Walmart in as, say, an initial grocery run. We'll pop it right in there. You can see it here on the left. We can turn off some of the clutter here. And there's that Walmart stop for perhaps to stock up before I hit my campground for the night. So there you have it, a quick getting started video. This may leave you with plenty of questions, but that's why we've got a whole slew of other videos on our YouTube channel. But we wanted you to get a taste of how quick and easy it is to pop in and create a trip. Thank you and welcome you to the RV Trip Wizard family. Look for more of our videos on Facebook and YouTube. Just search for RV Trip Wizard.